the things that when Penny and John and I did our preparation last week, one of the things we talked about was in one of his, I don't know if it was one of his books or one of his online articles, but our author, Dennis Houck, discussed somewhere the idea of lunar versus solar versus stellar mind. And he talked about the lunar experience of what washes over you. And primarily he talks about the lunar experience as being with the images. And so that's why we wanted to start with that. And then the solar experience is one of reason and logic and rational discussion, facts and figures and some things like that. And so that's my part, is to share the just kind of the information that we need to process today. And then the stellar experience or stellar mind is one of integration. And so that'll be John's section when we're trying to integrate this images plus facts plus, and then we'll add the tarot cards, and that'll be more of an integrative experience.
Other than we can say that we're here now to explore this idea of calcination in alchemy as viewed through the lens of the tarot, in particular the BOTA tableau, and we're concentrating on the first column of that today. So we'll touch on the cards later, but I think what we were going to do is first have a meditative experience in which we were going to look at some traditional and some more timeless images that relate to calcination, which I believe, Penny, you have prepared something for us to immerse ourselves in today.
Yes, thanks. So yeah, we'll, this will be a silent viewing of the slideshow, and then once the slideshow is finished, we'll kind of pause on a couple of the images specifically and kind of talk about our intuitions, ideas that come up. We all kind of thought it would be cool to start more with like a organic, intuitive, start on organic intuitive path, looking at this process before we kind of get into all the facts and figures, just to see what comes up for everybody just by looking at the images. And like John said, there's some very traditional older like drawings and paintings from like the Renaissance era up to more like photographs and a couple graphics. So we'll view the slideshow. It should take about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe a little longer. And then, like I said, we'll pause on an image and kind of start talking about a couple images specifically before we get into Joy's handout and kind of talking about the meat and bones of it. So I'm going to go ahead and just remind you all that this is a silent meditation. Then I'll cue us when we'll be ready to start the discussion. So this is a quick kind of recap. We did look at the Azoth in our first session in January. But basically the name comes from the Greek alphabet, the alpha and omega, like first and last, the A and Z, and beginning and ending. The black center bottom ray here, the ray of Saturn, begins our process with calcination, and we see our sphere of the crow and skull that we saw larger earlier. But I'm curious to hear, before we again start talking about everything in detail, what comes up for you guys when you look at this image, specifically kind of focusing at the bottom with Saturn, our sigil for salt. And, you know, after seeing all those images we just saw representing calcination and that kind of fiery working, you know, how do you connect any of those images with what you're seeing here? Or does anything in this image spark anything for you?
I hadn't really noticed the first time we looked at it that the feet at the bottom.
I would say my overall experience of those images tended to be one of discomfort. A lot of them were very uncomfortable, possibly.
Yeah.
Very painful images.
For sure. I mean, kind of like, to bring up what was mentioned earlier about like the tower, you know, that kind of fiery Mars energy that initiates transformation for sure is often uncomfortable.
I think I kind of had more of the opposite reaction. I had more of a morbid fascination and excitement and curiosity in some ways.
Oh, cool.
I don't know, just the idea of death and rebirth and those things, like just means new transformation, growth for me.
Yeah.
It reminded me of like a phoenix, you know, from the fire and the rebirth. That was what came to my mind. You know, I wasn't really thinking of it good or bad, just like with the glass being solid to a liquid, and, you know, the volcano, you know, from a solid to a liquid to a solid, it's just transformation and rebirth.
Yeah. What do you guys think about in the bottom sphere here next to the back ray with the crow on the perched on the skull? Does that, seeing as that's kind of the little, you know, icon, at least in this drawing, of that first sphere or operation of calcination, how do you attribute that to all the fiery imagery and concepts that we just looked at?
I think for me, it just seemed more peaceful than all the other ones in a way. Like, you know, it's kind of the ideology of death is waiting. It doesn't matter how long it takes, you'll get there eventually, I guess, is more of the theories I got. It was a lot more waiting energy versus the other ones was in the middle of the rebirth and the death.
Yeah.
And the crow for me, it's like this white ash gets lifted up to the sky. You know, it gets blown around by the wind, maybe, but I don't know, but it gets elevated in some way. That's kind of what I thought of when I looked at it.
Yeah. I think what Sarah said about peaceful resonates, because it, to me, kind of implies that the burning part has passed, if there's just ash or bone or skull left, I guess. So there's maybe that idea of like, well, I'm in it now, you know, like I've already done that first transformative process.
Well, to me, it kind of reminds me of the cycle of life and death, of going from the skeleton or skull into the expression of the bird, which the bird to me always represents the flight of the consciousness into higher realms.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's next to the thing with between Jupiter and Saturn puts a lot of stress into that for growing, because you have your expansion, but you can only expand so much at a time to keep the balance of something that would be really developing.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you. I've read a lot of stuff the last couple of years showing evidence that, you know, crows are a lot more evolved than originally thought, that it's believed that they mourn their dead, and that they carry grudges, that they'll literally go back and like signify to the other crows if, say, you've done something that they don't like. And then obviously if they do like you, they'll come and bring you fun, shiny little things. And, you know, but that idea of like mourning their dead, I thought was kind of an interesting tie-in with the sphere.
And they're
Well,
also known for bringing messages. I was a couple of years ago, I was up in the Rocky Mountains, up on top of the high mountain, the highest point in this park. And I was sitting out on a stone bench meditating, and I had this feeling of being watched, and I opened my eyes and there was this huge raven circling around me. And then it came by and looked at me and just took off. And it was like, the energy was really great. It was like a real blessing and acceptance. We're glad to have you. Sort
Yeah,
of feeling.
that is cool.
Yeah.
I'm, if it's okay with you guys, gonna move to this next image that was also in the slideshow from the Splendor Solace. This picture I find to just be beyond gorgeous. The central image in the flask there, the child is said to be pouring the premateria as representative of what's in the flask into the mouth of the dragon. And you see he's holding that bellows, and, you know, a bellows stokes heat or stokes fire by adding oxygen to heat or a flame. And so what is looking at calcination in this image, you know, teach us about that process, and maybe kind of what some of the like proactive things or just active things you have to actually do, like stoking flames? Like, how do you view that as an experience or personally?
Well, it always involves a lot of breath for me, and a lot of breath work, a lot of bringing the fire up from the solar plexus up to the body, sometimes lower, but that's a good place because that's a fiery place for me. And just feeling that moving through me. I do a lot of visualization with that. It's a strong feeling of creativity and feeling a sense of power of caring for and taking care of myself and whatever's around me, usually.
Good, thank you.
I like what you were saying. I'm not sure who that was, but about it moving through you, because I really like all these fire images, but even though I'm a Gemini, you know, sun sign and stuff, but anyway, this moving through you, it's like when I've done fire walking, which I've done quite a few times, the experience of it for me is like opening up this central channel inside of myself and letting the energy and the heat and the power of the fire kind of move up that central channel and kind of out the top of my head. And because if you try to constrain it, then it's damaging. Or if you try to ignore it, it's damaging. Or if you try and sort of tough it out over the coals, you know, you end up with really bad burns on the bottom of your feet. So it's I just like that. Anyway, what you're saying about that moving through. So with the fire walking, it does that, and as it's moving through, it actually also for me, it sort of makes that channel, that internal channel, it opens it up so that and kind of cleans it out, so that then after the fire walk, I feel like I'm that channel's more open. There's less impedance for the energy from the earth and the sky to connect through me, and it's really a beautiful sensation to have. So
Yeah, I like what you're sharing too. I find it awesome that you've done fire walking.
Yeah, that is neat.
Yeah, I didn't think I could bring myself to do that.
Is there anything else in the image that strikes you, or that works and, that connects to that process of calcination that we've looked at so far?
For me, I think it's a great picture of calcination, because the dragon for me represented the primitive self, and then he's feeding the fire with fuel as he's putting down the dragon's throat, and then using the bellows to create heat. So he's burning off the dross, the solidity, the parts he doesn't want of the dragon, moving it forward. So that to me was calcination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that too. And that makes good sense that it would be that.
I don't know how important the background information or images are supposed to be in this manuscript. I think I read somewhere that they're mostly filler, but there does seem to be an overriding theme of, sort of tilling your own garden, that whatever you feed is what is going to grow. I thought of that, what is that story about how everybody's got two wolves inside them? One is angry and one is friendly or something. And then the question is, which one is going to rule you? And it will be whichever one you feed. So
I kind of recall that. Yeah.
And some of these images do suggest benefiting from getting rid of excess. I don't see them all quite fitting into that theme, but some of them do. Like on the left there, it looks like a rich person is giving away his extra to people who need it.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody down here looks like he must be stomping on grapes maybe to make wine. So get rid of the pits and whatever. I'm not sure about the water barrel that seems to be spilling over onto the ground, but perhaps it's returning the excess. Maybe I'm not reading that image correctly. So there is that theme that applies not just to the center image, but maybe is supported by these images of, good labor, good society. Maybe the guy getting hung in the background isn't quite so happy about it, but
Yeah.
or the pig that might be getting slaughtered for everybody else's benefit. I'm not sure.
Well, I think there's an idea of like things breaking down. I like what you said too about getting rid of the excess. But I think also with like that funeral procession and like the slaughter of the pig and the tanning of the hides, there's kind of the idea of like transferring maybe one state or something from one state to a different state, whether it's the money or the grapes, but like what you were saying, getting rid of the excess. I really like that.
Yeah, I thought of going kind of back to the background. I don't know, for some reason I get lots of image, like the nursery rhyme, if you guys remember, of Henny Penny. That's what came to my mind for some reason when I no idea why, but literally I haven't even remembered that in years. And that's literally what I thought of. It's very community oriented for sure.
That's awesome. I forgot about Henny Penny. Yeah.
I did till like just a couple minutes ago or a couple seconds ago.
Well, looking on it in a little broader way, it seems to be presenting us with the picture with the child with the dragon, which, basically there's lots to be said about the child leading us, about the child feeding and nurturing the more spiritual, less material side of ourselves. And through that purity of that child, we can raise up to the crown or to the higher realms of our consciousness, which would be the seventh chakra, which is like a portal where we go into the next octave of existence, or the transpersonal chakras. And so this child is doing this, and it's above, it's presenting this picture of raising up our energy and burning out the dross with the violet flame, of the sacred flame of the spirit, in a setting that's showing that it brings together our lives, our communities, the things that we need to do on the human level to live and survive, that it's supporting that, and that there's a connection between that. And I think
that's a great connection.
important.
Connecting the transpersonal with the personal, or like you said, the community. Before I move to the last image we'll look at in depth, I think I might have seen someone had their hand raised. Was it Steph maybe on the icon?
Yes, it's me. Hi.
Hi.
I just look at the image in the middle. I feel like that the vest is like it's closed, and since this is about calcination, but when there's no air inside the vest, fire cannot happen.
Yeah.
So I just keep like getting sort of like and because of this image is so different to the background, I keep like reading them as like for some reason the middle image give me dictation feeling, like because the crown maybe, and then the vest has no air and you can start the fire, and this baby is trying so hard to light up, and it's so, but the background is very positive, you know, it's like everybody's seems like doing good in a way. So that I don't know how do I interpret that, you know, like but I noticed that I just want to mention it.
Thank you. Yeah, the idea about needing air to have fire, I think, is really important. And as we go on to seeing how each element is affected by or transformed or even just stifled by the absence or addition of another. So I really like that point, Steph. Thank you. Okay, so our crucified serpent here. So a key phrase with this image is often fixing the volatile. And if we remember that, you know, volatile basically means something that's, you know, easily or quickly or rapidly or unpredictably prone to changing. And then to fix something is to stabilize or secure something to a point in space or time. The idea of sort of stabilizing an active principle is part of the image. But when you think about either fixing the volatile with calcination, like why would we need to do that to start this process? Or how do you see yourself doing that in your own personal transformations? The idea of fixing the volatile.
Penny, I think I'm not following you about the volatility as it relates to this image.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, if there's something else that comes out, I mainly just brought that up because this image is like emblematic of the principle of fixing the volatile, and that, you know, the snake could be seen as something changeable or unpredictable, and he's now fixed to that cross, is part of the imagery here. And so more just the idea of why would you need to stabilize what is active or overly active or fiery within you as part of a process.
Okay.
So I almost think of, it's not quite, so I'm having contradiction in my own mind because it's not quite comparison, but I almost think of what we're about to go into on the 7th, you know, Saturn and Pisces. And maybe I'm having too many conversations around that in general lately, but like, the only thing is I don't really see Pisces necessarily as volatile as much as I see it as just boundless, vast, infinite, but I don't see it necessarily as that chaotic energy. Well, I mean, I guess it could be to some extent, but I do see as like Saturn is the boundaries and the limitations to actually bring things into matter, whereas like So in this image too, you can see like even that cross itself is bound around this sapphire, and the waves behind it are just very volatile too in a lot of ways, and water is Pisces too. So I just get a lot of Saturn and Pisces imagery relation.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks, Sarah. I hadn't made the specific connection to the event coming up on the 7th, but I like your thinking.
It could also be taken just as a shorthand for physical creativity. You know, when you have energy, one outlet for that is expression, and expression, like this particular picture suggests a physical expression. You make something, or it's a time to plant, perhaps. Although that doesn't quite fit with the calcination idea. But still, when I look at that, that's kind of how I see it. That the ball there at the bottom is an abstraction for the thing, the lead or whatever that you're going to do something with.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, when you're talking about sort of like taking the creativity, and I can't remember the word you used, but like actually expressing it. You know, I see this image as part of calcination in the way that, you know, when you're burning away something, or I'm thinking about that crow on the skull, you've also burned away that which is, you know, impermanent or changeable, or perhaps was of a season or of a time, and not necessarily the matter that is fit to be transformed into something later, right? You're kind of burning off, like you said earlier, the excess, or the things that don't actually matter, or the things that aren't serving you. And so by doing that, you're kind of fixing those things that are, you know, burning them away, but also then fixing into place maybe what is going to stay. I don't know, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself.
I think about Michelangelo's approach to sculpting as well, which was, you know, he was taking away the stone that wasn't part of the sculpture that he could already see.
Yeah.
So what was being removed wasn't necessarily bad or useless. It was just not relevant to the creation at the moment. What he saw in the stone, what was already there. He had a very kind of animistic approach to marble. Because some of these things where the language that's being used, I understand it's part of alchemy as a kind of personal process. This is the way people speak. But the idea of burning away and absolutely getting rid of this and getting rid of that and what's no longer serving you. Yeah, sometimes that all seems a little radical for me. That it seems more appropriate to not think of it as the universe taking things away, but that you're choosing a certain path. And if you're going to do this thing now, then those things, some things need to be set aside so that you can accomplish that task. Maybe that's a little more small-minded, but.
No, I think it's an interesting point. My experience of this image, I feel like I'm like looking at something completely different than what everybody else is looking at, in the sense that to me it's like the serpent's like isn't crucified, because crucified implies a certain fixed restraint. You know, I mean, you're like when Jesus was, you know, crucified on the cross, he couldn't get down. I mean, you know, he was like there and not necessarily there because he wanted to be there, kind of thing. But with this image of the snake, it's to me, it's more like the snake's hugging the cross, more like it's embracing the cross and the sphere at the bottom. And it's also that whole sphere at the bottom with the cross on the top. I was raised Catholic. There's something very Catholic about that for me. So I'm not completely in touch with what that is at the moment, but that's like in a Catholic iconism, that ball and cross on the top, that's a really, that's like a power symbol. That's like something that the bishop would hold it and kind of hold out and over the congregation, and as a symbol of his power and connection to the divine. So so with the snake embracing that, I don't know. I'm just I'm just feeling a little confused by the conversation overall, but the and the snake for me has this very feminine energy too. So there's a really strong feminine connection for me with the snake, and of course the symbology of a snake being this animal of transformation and everything, but
Well, I think I'm going to actually go ahead and pause you there, Eleanor, because I think it's probably good to go ahead and move on to start talking about more of these. The great thing about these images is, you know, some resonate with some people and some not for others. And that's why imagery, whether it's the tarot or some of these images, is so awesome. Is, you know, there's so many ways you can look at it. You know, for example, like to me, the snake, like you said, he's hugging it. To me, it felt like a voluntary act, like a voluntary sacrifice in calcination, as opposed to like being forced to do it or literally nailed to a cross. You know, it to me intimated more of a, but I love the way like different people see images so differently. It's just one of the power of imagery for sure. So thank you for all your awesome ideas. There was some good stuff in there. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'm next here. Thank you, Penny, for sharing those images, which was definitely very thought-provoking. So that's why we started with these images, is just having all of this wash over you so that you can kind of experience what that feels and just have your own natural response to it. So over in the handout, if you have it, can pull it up to look at, or if you printed it out or whatever. First of all, I did include, just for your reference, I included the tableau and the 3 cards that we're going to be looking at today, which is the Magician, Strength, and the Devil, and that's going to be John's section. But down below that, on the second page, is when I start with the calcination info. And I do include some of the emblems there for your reference. So calcination means to burn away to a fine white ash, and it actually, the root of that word is calx, which means bone. And so the very first step of our alchemical transformation process is to release all of this, is to get rid of the, like, as people were saying, to get rid of the dross, to burn away, to purify. And the experience of that can be a very difficult one. It can be a very, there is a huge sense of loss with it. It's not, I mean, some people were saying that it felt really, I don't know. I'm surprised. I think transformation is a great feeling, but I don't think that the feeling of that kind of loss generally feels very good, to be honest. And I know that that might be different for other people, but I do think that that it's important to recognize that for the average person, this is uncomfortable, and there is a strong sense of loss, and that is part of the process. Because if we, I don't know, I think if we forget that, there can be a feeling of, I'm doing it wrong. It's not, it's not worth it, or something like that. Why does everybody else say transformation's so great? I'm feeling something really horrible here. It's like, yeah, it's going to feel horrible. So go ahead and don't think that you've messed up or lost lost something. It feels pretty painful. But I wanted to kind of explore some of these ideas, and ask for, I'm sure most of us have gone through some kind of calcination experience. And so what experience do you care to share, an experience that you've had regarding calcination, a loss of the sense of self, or of your own identity, and kind of what brought it about? How did you experience it? And even looking through this handout with some of the symbolism for Saturn and lead, how did that play into it? I could read the handout, but I don't know that that's a wise use of our time. So I'm just going to go straight into more of a question thing.
I myself have had, several experiences where I would consider to be calcination. I mean, one of which was like a very severe one, which was self-initiated. But there was a time when I was just decided to quit my job. I left social media. I stopped reading tarot professionally. I just like dropped everything. And for a few months, it was just, it felt like I had just jumped off a cliff, but I was floating. But I knew eventually that fall was going to happen, and it did eventually. Because after a few months, it was like, okay, where's my sense of purpose now? I don't know where it is. I gave up all of this stuff because it didn't feel right to me. So I just said, okay, up it goes in flames, and I'm still going through that process now, trying to find, picking through the ash and still trying to find out what was left behind by it.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting distinction, John, because I'm thinking of different experiences that I've had. And when my marriage ended, it felt like a big calcination experience, but it was not something I chose. It was not something I wanted. It was not, it was, I was sort of thrown off the cliff as opposed to jumping off the cliff intentionally. And so I think sometimes these calcination experiences are like that, where you're basically getting thrown off the cliff, or, you're walking along the path and you fall into a big hole or something, but then right now I'm actually feeling like I'm starting a calcination process that is more like what John was talking about, where I mentioned that reading that someone had done for me, that I feel like this is what I want to tear all the structures down. I want to get rid of the things that I feel like are binding me. And but the point you made, Joy, about loss and loss of identity, I think that's a big part of it. Why the loss is excruciating in certain ways. Because when I got divorced, the loss was excruciating. But even now with making this choice, it's excruciating also, because you just have to face stuff that, maybe you didn't really, I don't know, I need to face some stuff about myself that I didn't really want to face. So.
Cultivation has a lot for me to do with attachments and addictions. And I spent a number of years working in alcoholic and chemical addiction programs. And when people came in, they were surrendering. Either they were pushed there by legal or familial, or for whatever reason, they were pushed into this position. They had to volunteer. They had to voluntarily sign into the program. And we were often very surprised that we didn't approach the chemicals per se directly. We approached their image, the way they were in the world. We're talking about Los Angeles heroin and PCP users. And it was all about their image. So we had to annihilate that first. We took away their clothes. We put them in took away their identities in a lot of ways. And it was so many people really were in a lot of pain from doing that because their attachments to that identity as being gangbangers or drug dealers or whatever, however they saw themselves, to give that up was like that serpent on the cross. He was there voluntarily, but he's being crucified. And they felt that way. Many would leave, many would stay. But I always see that. And when we talk about calcination, that's the dross that we're cutting through, our attachments and how subtle they are sometimes.
William, what you just said was painfully beautiful for sure. And I think such a perfect example of calcination, because granted, while not all of us might not be walking around necessarily with a drug or alcohol condition, we do all have our addictions and our attachments, and those things of our identity that we cling to. And when John brought up like the changes he had made, I think too, I've gone through several bouts of some pretty dysfunctional and debilitating depression in my life. And I've come to the point where for me, depression is a disease of forgetfulness, because I'll forget everything I am because I become dysfunctional. And so I'm not seeing the friends that I normally would see, or I'm not doing the work I would normally do. And there's this sort of forgetfulness. But then what happens at the end of it is the things that have remained are the real true things. And so there's times that those depressive episodes have actually been a gift, because after I kind of went through that burning away or forgetfulness process of that, which wasn't really inherent to like the true identity or true self, you're able to actually see what's still there, like that crow on the skull. The bone, the form of the skull is like a representation of the matter that is still worthy of being transformed. So anyway, your example, William, was just very profound in such a very visceral, tangible example, I think, of burning away of the identity and giving away your clothes and your image, because that's kind of the thing we all see first thing in the morning, right?
Yeah, the comment here that it feels like there's a process, the part of the process is the feeling of being lost. And the first stage in the Azoth image that Penny showed us with the star and the seven rayed star, that very first little circle that had the crow and the skull, its title is Visita, which is Latin for journey, to go visiting or to take a journey. And yeah, there is a sense of being lost, of like not being where, like you don't know where you are. Donna.
One of the things that, because I've been on this journey a long time, and I've done a lot of my stuff through Eastern means, but it all comes down to having the same threads of truth. And, the identity, I'm so glad that y'all are bringing that up, because it's so crucially important. We grow up in this world thinking that this is that, and I'm so-and-so, and things need to be this way. And if they're not, I'm threatened. We don't have real understanding of the reality of life. And we are sort of living in this imagery that's not true. It is the dross that needs to be burned. But how hard is it to let go of that? I mean, that's like a major attachment. And it's something that our ego has diligently taken care of all of our years. It has seen to it that we don't get too far out of the box, that we don't do things that are scary, that we protect ourselves, and it will put its life practically on the line to do that. So there's a lot of work to be done to transforming all of that. I can remember I just was at times really feeling kind of confused about it all. And I would wake up feeling like, nothing feels like it used to. Nothing seems to be the same. What all do I have to give up? And I finally realized I have to give up my life as Donna. You know, I have to give up my attachment to the things that make me feel safe. I have to face my fears. I have to go through the void. And for me, the void that I'm speaking of is when you have disattached from so much, you've let go of so much. And when you go through a cycle like that, oftentimes just most of the people in your life just suddenly disappear. You know, it's like you don't belong anywhere. And so what do you have to anchor yourself during that time? And that's the time of the void and the emptiness and the need to be able to start allowing another expression of life to come through you that is without all those things. And it is not easy. It can take years. It just depends on how attached we are to the things that we're having to let go of, how much we can give our life. You know, can we lay our life down, you know, to go to something better? And it is sometimes scary and confusing. But at some point, when we get a better identity, you know, we identify ourselves more with our higher consciousness and have understanding of the world, life changes tremendously and it all becomes worth it. But when you're going through it, it's not. It's like just really scary. And, you know, a lot of the things we all go through, the shadow work, and we have all this stuff that comes up. And sometimes it feels like it's coming up to punish us, or it's coming up to haunt us, or, you know, and we don't want to look at it and we want to get away from it. But it's really, you know, the logic is reverse logic to what we used to have in our old life. But the logic becomes, if I can give this up, it's coming up to be healed. You know, as we have the fire burning within us, the sacred fire, and our Kundalini is rising, our consciousness is rising, it gets to the point that all that stuff is coming up so we can let it go. We can heal it, you know, but we become afraid of it. It reminds us of the pain and suffering. And so we have to do a lot of work on our thinking and the way we see this process, and to trust the process instead of fighting it. And I've probably said too much.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, I love hearing everybody's experience, and it's really, I think it's really heartening to hear so many people that have really been all the way through that experience and to the other side. And you know, for anybody that's listening in that is in the middle of it, that might be, I think that is inspiring to hear those stories. Before we hand it off to John, I want to tell a little story of my own, and I included this as what I'm calling a meditation on the handout there. But yeah, when you're in the middle of it, like I said, it's very inspiring and motivational to hear all these stories, but it can be you do feel so alone and lost when you're in the middle of it. And I had a experience myself that was very, very, instead of being a long drawn out, most of the circumstances were long and drawn out, but I was able to go through a very unique, like specific transformation when I was having some of this like difficult period in my life. And this was probably, I was living in Denver. I had a condo, and I'm guessing it was maybe, I don't know if it's 15 years ago or something. I'm not exactly sure, but well, and before I say that, I actually wanted to bring back some of our symbolism. So some of the symbols for Saturn are endings, limitations. Its symbol is the skeleton, just like the skull that we saw, just the whole skeleton, which provides structure. It holds things together. And the idea of getting down to the bones, getting down to the baseline structure. The element lead is heavy. It's very malleable. It's it has a cubic cleavage pattern. And so it reminds us of a grain of salt, which again is about structure and the form of something. And so part of figuring out even this fixed and volatile stuff is what is volatile about us. I was thinking of volatile coming from the root to fly. What about us isn't important? What about us can fly away? And what about us is that basic skeletal structure? So back during this period when I had these difficulties, I was unemployed, could not figure things out, could not get a job, and I couldn't make the payments on my condo, and it started to go into foreclosure, and I needed to what they call cure the loan. And my mom had always, I was never very good with money. My mom usually bailed me out in most circumstances like this. And so I finally, hanging my head in shame was like, Mom, I can't do it. I can't figure this out. I need the money to cure this loan. And so there's this complicated process. I had to call the bank and they had to tell me what the exact amount due was. And then I had to pay it by a certain date, and I had to pay it. I had to wire it. And so I had to get the money from my mom. So she had to mail me a check, and then I had to cash the check at my bank. And then I had to take the cash from my bank over to the grocery store where they could wire it. And it was all, it seemed, it was a very strange experience. And so I had, I think I was supposed to call them. There was something about calling them, and I think I was supposed to call them before I wired the amount or something like that. And so and then on top of this, because I was so broke, my cell phone, through the beauty of planned obsolescence, was no longer working very well. I'd had it for quite a number of years, and I didn't want to, and you can get a new one. Back in that day, you could get a new one just for free practically, as long as you renewed your contract. But I was so scared. I didn't want to renew my contract because I seriously thought I might not be able to pay my phone bill, and I didn't want to be in a contract and have that hassle. And so I hadn't gotten a new cell phone, and I was out of my contract, and it had cell service, but the phone just wouldn't connect unless I was really close to I don't know, a tower or whatever. I don't know what. So I had to make this very important phone call. I could not get a signal on my phone, and I drove and drove and drove all over the place trying to find someplace where I got the signal. And finally I did, in a parking lot of a big box store, and called them and said, okay, I've got the money. I'm ready to do this. What's the next step here? And the guy said, okay, hold on one second. And he went off, and then he came back and he's like, well, here's your amount. And he told me, and it was not what they had told me before. And I had done everything right, and it was within the time. And I just was like, I don't have that much. And the difference was not something I could just magically get. And I just hung up, and I just sat there in the car, and I was like, I'm going to lose this condo. I can't do this. And I just went through this horrible sense of, I'm a failure. I can't do this. Why can't I hold a job? Why can't I do any of these things? Why can't I do something simple like pay a mortgage on a condo? It's not that much. And it was a horrible experience. And then I started thinking, you know what? You don't need to be a homeowner. And I was like, that never occurred to me. And I was like, okay, so I'm not a homeowner. So it doesn't matter if I pay this or not. I can get rid of this condo if I want to. And then I started going through, what else am I not? It's like, I'm not a bad daughter. It's like, oh, I don't have to have that relationship. I can let go of that. And then I just started going through and it's like, well, what am I? What am I? And I was just like, well, I'm a writer. And it was like, okay, well, what if somebody took that away from you? What if they took your pen away? And I'd be like, well, I'd act it out. And it's like, okay, well, you know, what if they took your voice away? Well, I would dance it. You know, what if they took your legs away? Well, I would mouth paint it. And they're like, okay, well, what if they took your brush away? And it's just like, this is my own mind having this argument with me, but I was really getting mad at my own mind. It's like, what the hell do you want from me? And then it was like, I'm a storyteller. And it doesn't matter if I have to dance it or mouth paint it or whatever. It's like, I'm a storyteller and you can't take that away from me. And then I thought, oh, why don't you just call them and say, hey, do you realize I called before and got the amount? And what you're telling me is different? It's like, oh, that's a good idea. So I called him back and it's like, oh, I already got the amount and this is what it is. And he's like, oh yeah, you're right. And it's like, okay, here's the money. Whatever I still had to wire it or something. I forget how it worked, but at any rate, I made the call and he's like, yeah, okay, perfect. You got it. And I was like, okay. And so, and that was such an amazing experience for me. And I've been able ever since then to be like, who am I? What am I? I'm a storyteller. And that's part of my identity. And that's something that I can always use in anything that I share, anything that I want to, any way that I want to exist with people. So that's my story, and that's what I encourage people to do when you're going through this calcination process, is to say, okay, fine, bring it on. Take it all away. Take it away. What you can take it away from me? What is it that you can't take away from me? What is it that I will always have no matter what? And that to me, it can be extraordinarily transformative. So now I'm going to hand it off to John.
I'm sorry, Joy, can I just say one quick thing in relation to your story?
Mm-hmm.
I'll make it quick. First of all, great story. I love that idea, like you said in the last line, of continuing the process until you discover that which can't be taken away. But I think too, the process you're describing also works kind of from a different angle. I've used it a lot, like during depressive or anxiety bouts, where you keep burning away the thing until you get to that final core of what the problem is. So you can also use this calcination process to find out, what is that base thing that is troubling me, or is the source of an issue? What's the thing that won't burn away, right? And it's usually some kind of a need, or, you know, if you're anxious, like to use Joy's story about like not making the mortgage payment, you could be like, okay, well, what happens if I don't do that? And then you'll come up with an answer. Okay, well, what happens if that happens? And then you have an, you know, and you keep kind of like taking away those steps until what's left is like, this is the thing I'm actually afraid of, or this is the thing that matters to me the most in this situation. You know, I call it the and then what process. Is I'm like, okay, and then what? You know, if someone's mad at you, you're like, well, what happens if someone's mad at me? Well, then they won't like me. Okay, and then what? Well, then that might mean other people don't like me. Okay, then what? Well, then it might mean I'm not a good person. Okay, then what? Like, you just keep taking away all those things that aren't true or based in reality. And so I like what you're talking about with your story, Joy, and it just reminded me of, you can also use that process for kind of those intangible things of, you know, weeding out anxieties or issues.
Awesome. And again, I'm going to pass it off to John now.
So what we would like to do now is, after absorbing all of this nifty stuff about calcination and the all the imagery, the meditation, the solar, the lunar, and now we go to the stellar, where we actually bring it back to the cards here. And let me see if we can get this going. So of this, we have which did give you first a little reminder of what it was that we were looking at in the Bodhi tableau. And it was this arrangement here. So what we have here is an arrangement basically of all 21 cards arranged with the Fool existing somewhat outside the tableau, an arrangement of 3 rows of 7 each. Each of the 7 columns that are arranged here and in this particular configuration are said to be analogous to the 7 alchemical steps that we're following. But for now, we're going to concentrate on, if I can get this going here. Where am I? There we go. We're going to concentrate first on calcination, which is this first column. And these are just some key phrases that I have learned, and we've already covered some of these, like, the burning off of the dross or the dross, however it's pronounced, I don't know, but it doesn't matter because it's all going away anyhow. This is just, some of these things like are sacrificing the ego. I think this one thing that David Houck really presses home is that, the thing that's being calcinated here is our egos. And I think we've already brought that subject up quite a bit too, is that loss of ego is what happens during this calcination process. The dross that we speak of is just anything that's unnecessary to what is essential to our core being. This is what we're after. We're looking for our essence and not necessarily the paper doll dresses that we clothe it up with. And of course, what Case equates this column with is the experience of unfoldment, is that unfoldment of bondage, is that, first of all, discovering what is bonding us to, and what is keeping us from really expressing our true natures, and obtaining the freedom for that bondage. So just to remind everyone too about some of these 3 levels, these 3 levels of experience that are represented here by the rows. At the bottom, we have what is the equivalent of salt in the alchemical jargon, and then that translates into the conditions in which you find yourself in this particular phase and what we're looking to overcome. And in this particular case, we have the Devil card at the base, key 15. Now, I'm going to just throw out some basic ideas about what Case says about these cards in his particular jargon, and then we'll probably just open this up to discussion and contemplation of the cards. We'll see these cards in this larger view all at once in a moment. But he equates this card to the bondage of ignorance, of just simply accepting appearances and not going any further, and making faulty assumptions and faulty reasoning based on that ignorance. But the next level up we have is the level of Mercury. These are the agencies, the spirit of the matter, the laws through which this particular condition has arrived at. And here we have key 8, strength, which Case has linked to the controlling of the life force. He equates this card with the serpent power, otherwise a Kundalini energy. He also makes reference to the ability to be able to control this force, and by controlling this force, to change the pattern in which this law eventually has its effect. And at the top level, we have the principles, the cause of the matter, as well as the means of escape. Here we have the ego consciousness itself, which is how Case defines it, and the ability to concentrate. The concentration here is on the concentration of the calcination process. Now, I just want to leave it there. We'll take a look at these cards here. We'll look at these key ideas, just these little key phrases, and we'll also remember what we've just spoken about in terms of the experience of calcination, how it works, what it does, and see if we can find those keys here in the cards. Does anyone notice any, first of all, let's, look at some of the visual relationships between some of these cards too. And feel free to just open up some observations about what they see there in just how this particular group of cards relate to one another.
John, one of the first things that, excuse me, comes to mind with just looking at all three as a quick sweep is about choice, that there's some relationship to choice that comes through with all three of these cards. So.
Do you want to elaborate on that, the type of choices that you find in each?
Okay. So with the Devil card, in a sense, even though it might be a choice out of ignorance, we're choosing to keep the chains, like they can lift the chains off their necks without any problem, but they're choosing not to, in that situation, or they haven't made the choice to do that at that point. With the Strength card, there's this choice about, am I going to work with the energy of spirit and law and agency and the life force, or am I not? And then with the magician's making a choice of concentrating, by concentrating directly to make things happen, to open up to connecting with the soul and with the greater powers and that kind of thing. And also sort of choosing, okay, what tool am I going to use right now? What tool is going to serve me to be able to bring forth this magic that is potentially available to me. So.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any observations on the way these cards are related to one another? Maybe we can also look at some of the repeating symbols we find in some of these cards.
Yeah,
of which there are quite a few.
Yeah, something I noticed is the crowns on the Devil card, the star, and then you have the infinite symbol. The crowns across, so they're each crown and evolving, and then in the Devil card you have the chains on the human's neck, and then there's in the Strength card like a collar of roses, and then the roses are continued into the Magician card, so it's almost like they move across.
Yeah, that's a good observation. There's also the you mentioned the repetition of the lemniscate of the Magician and the Strength. There's also the roses are picked up also in the Magician's card as well. And roses are a symbol of passion in this particular, I think, arrangement. I think they also, it's the passion, which is one of the things that you're looking to get under control here. I think one of the things I was wondering about too is like, in terms of even especially with the Strength card being there in the middle of this tableau, what kind of relationship of this type of control do we have here? I mean, in a lot of cases that the strength card is seen as that the animal forces that are being controlled, are more subconscious, desire-driven type of urgencies. And in this particular case, it almost seems like the lion could be part of the ego itself, which is being under control, because this is what we're trying to subdue in this process is the ego. So that and the part of the process of calcination here is again burning off what is absolutely unnecessary.
The color symbolism doesn't quite work in this deck, but in the Rider-Waite-Smith it does, where you can track the flame that the devil is holding. It's in someone else's hands. Then it becomes the animal, as you say. It's like the animal forces, what we need to learn to control or recognize, and then it becomes the cloak and the magician. So it's something he can take off if he chooses, right? It becomes something that he can control at will without even thinking about it. He owns it, in effect. I'm not sure that that's the progression you're tracking here, but that was the first thing I saw when I looked at it in the Rider-Waite-Smith anyway.
Well, just to go on record, I'm not tracking any progression at all. I'm opening this up and just putting a few ideas on the table, but I'm also opening up that table for other ideas about what you see in the cards and in this relationship that it has to calcination.
What I like about the progression is that the devil card is in the dark. There's no light around them. It's black. And the attachment, they're a part of it. The reason they don't take off the change is because they feel they're a part of it. They're not unhappy to be there. Their attachment is serving them, like most attachments do initially. In the second stage, it's the lion and the lady, and they're attached still. That ring of roses goes around her too. They're still attached, but now she's starting to take control. She's starting to initiate her will against the forces of whatever they are, or the release of whatever it is. And then in the third stage, with both of those cards being in the light, the sunlight, yellow or mercury, whatever, but they're there and they're in the open air, not in the dark. And they're initiating, and in the third card, the magician, he's indicating as above, so is below. But I always like to think as below, so is above. So when he gives up something down in the physical level, he's giving up something in the upper levels too. And that's what I think the magician is about in comparison with the other two, that he's a higher form of progression. Moving towards the light.
Right, and it's the higher form of progression in very much in contrast with the devil being, starting in the dark.
It's interesting that the devil is in the dark, but his Hebrew letter is ayin, which means eye, to see.
Yeah, the essence of appearance.
Mm-hmm.
Donna, you have your hand raised. You're on mute still. You may need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. In looking at this, it's a very interesting progression to me, because with the devil card and the two people of opposite genders in chains really represents to me the world of duality represented by the opposite genders. And they're chained to the animal nature, our material world, our physical world. The way we think about that, there's a whole line of thinking with the objective mind on dealing with the material world. And a lot of times people's thoughts about things don't go beyond that. They are actually controlled by their senses, their egos, and such as we've discussed. But then as that begins to change some and light comes in, we go to the strength card, which could represent the heart, the feelings, the flowers of passion being put around his neck to match the woman. So we're becoming to where the human part of us is working with the animal nature and is beginning to have freedom. She's not in chains. So that to me, it would be the emotional nature. And then in the next one, we have the magician, which is the male part of us, the part of action, of thinking. And so we have our thoughts and our viewpoints, our worldviews change to something higher in the mental area and in our ability to conceive of things. And we learn the magic of joining together the animal self towards the higher mental self. And there's magic in that, because that's where the transformation really starts happening, is what it brings to me. Thank you.
Thank you. It brings magic, and it brings terror as well. I can tell you from experience that is the calcination process, but can be exhilarating. An exhilarating process, depending on what your attitude is toward it. Once you realize what it is you're trying to achieve, it makes all the difference.
You know, it's funny, I'm actually reminded of, I can't remember who the woman was that brought up this story earlier, but about the two wolves and which one you feed. And if you look at the magician, you know, as that channel of attention or the power of concentration that Case applies to him, you know, and strength could be one wolf and the devil could be another wolf, or, you know, the lion and the beast. You know, where you place that attention or concentration or intention, you know, is going to be the one that you feed. And the strength, you know, representing the roses not only represent passion, but they also represent the initiative desire nature, that thing that first strikes our hearts that says, you know, I'm ready to change, I'm ready to evolve. And so I don't know, for some reason that wolf parable that someone brought up earlier actually came to mind with these three. The other thing too is they technically all three do have the lemniscates or figure eights. The at the beast's navel there, what looks like the symbol for Taurus is actually said to be a lemniscate that isn't fully completed, because that card is so bogged down in matter, that circuit of energy and the constant spiraling of that has been cut or is unseen. So I like that all three of these actually technically do have that lemniscate.
And the devil's little lemniscate there is like hovering right
over his Mars center.
Right below him.
And I think that relates to this thing of like, there's a part of us that always wants to move towards that freedom, right? Even if we're not conscious of it, even if we're not able to access it. But there is this desire, and maybe that's partly where the rose thing comes in, but that we want to move towards that freedom, that there's that, it can be really going on in the background, depending on where you are in the process of the calcination. But it's a driving force in itself and of itself that I think is something that if we can access it, you know, that's a very helpful thing. But sometimes with the devil card, for example, we're not able to access it at all. And then with the magician, we potentially are accessing it pretty fully. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually noticed a bit about the lemniscate, or at least the pentagram part of the in the devil, because that is also rendered as a continuous line, just like the lemniscate is. So in a way, it's kind of like they're all like, practicing their own little, forms of magic, even though some are darker than others. I'd like to hand it back over to Joy, because I believe you have a spread that you would like to offer to the group. It's something that we can work on our own time, but we wanted to just maybe have like a little demonstration about how it works. So I will move it over to Joy.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Let me grab the link to that spread and put it in there. It's there at the very, I put it up in the beginning, but in case you didn't get it, here it is again. And so, in fact, I'll share my screen. So what we've got here, this is a fairly typical spread for the kinds of work that I do. It is a little bit more complicated than your typical tarot spread. And so there's a little bit of an introduction here about the calcination process. But I imagine doing this spread with a couple different decks, having something a little more traditional, and then using a personal deck. And so back in the very first session that we had in January, we had asked, what do you want to change? And how do you want to be? Like, as a result of that change, then what would the outcome be? What is it about yourself that you want to change? And then what do you want that outcome to be after that change? And so for this spread, we're going to, from your personal deck, remove the card that you chose to represent what you want to change. And we're going to call that the significator card. And then from the rest of this, and there's plenty here to this describes the actual process, so you can read that when you're ready to go through all of that. But when we go to the actual spread here, you'll put your significator over here on the left, and this is a card that you chose to represent what you want to perform. What we do in my spreads is that we work with what I call visual cues, which are details in the image that represent for you for this purpose, what detail in the card is most relevant to your interpretation. So for instance, I don't know if I can think of a good example. For some reason, the strength card is coming to mind, maybe because it's kind of right there in the middle, but to some people, the lemniscate was the most important. To some people talked about the wreath that connects the two of them. Sometimes people make a big deal about the mouth of the lion. Sometimes it's a color. If you had chosen the strength card as your significator, what details in that image were most relevant to why you chose it? And so write down those 3 visual cues. And then I invite you to look at our 3 cards that we're working with, again, from your deck that's more traditional, whether it's your Rider-Waite-Smith or your Tarot de Marseille or a BOTA deck, if you have one of those. And again, focus, and I just put some basic things, but we've just talked about this, and now that we've talked about it, you know, that this is the principle, that this is just the different the different symbols that John brought up. You can modify this, you know, the principle or whatever you want. You can modify this language to express what is most relevant to you. But this is the quality here that we're going to apply to escape from the bondage. And then, and again, what about this card and our discussion that we just had is most relevant to you of that? Maybe the fact that he's pointing up, maybe it's the lemniscate, maybe the fact that he chose the wand of the implements, maybe the rose. We talked about all those things. Which one of those things, or the thing of your choice that is most relevant to you, is most likely to help you with this? So write down that as a visual cue. And if you want to start at the bottom, I actually kind of went up, I think, and then down again. It's kind of like you can go any way, but you might want to start at the bottom and work your way up. And so again, find a visual cue for each of those. And so then we go over here and jot those down, and these. So then we go over here, the condition of bondage in my life. Select intentionally by looking for a card that has both visual cue A from your significator card, as well as the visual cue from the devil card. And so you're going to look through your deck, looking at the images, and find something that has both. So again, if you had, let's say you had you did have the strength card as your significator, and let's say you chose, I don't know, maybe a wreath, and then down here, maybe you chose the fire, the burning wand. Would look through your deck until you find something that has both a wreath in it and a burning, a flame or something like that. And this is why I use a personal deck. I have no idea what your deck images look like. And so you just find something that makes the most sense to you. And maybe, let's say it's the Ace of Wands. There's not always a wreath in that, but there could be. Maybe you find something like that. So then card one would be that card. And so then you would repeat that process for each of these, and then you go into the next step. And so this is called the highest expression. So now that you've got cards 1, 2, and 3 chosen, well, and you do your interpretation. And so once you've chosen cards 1, 2, and 3, then write out your interpretation. And I'm really big on writing things out. I think it really helps to clarify and to give structure and form to what you're doing, and make sure that you're thinking it through all the way. And so write out your interpretations for cards 1, 2, and 3. So we're not even going to pull 4, 5, and 6 until we've already done an interpretation here for the first 3 cards. So then after that, then you're going to look at card 4. This is the highest expression. It's the white ash that remains after you've burned away the dross, or however you're seeing this process. And so this you draw randomly, but you're focusing now on your card 1 and your interpretation that you wrote down for card 1. Even if I journal quite a bit on the card, I'll summarize my interpretation in a short phrase or a sentence and circle it on the paper. So I'm like, this is my bottom line, nutshell interpretation that I've done for card 1. And then I'll focus on that nutshell interpretation and pull the highest expression. And so and again, you'll do a visual cue and a keyword once you've chosen that card. And you'll repeat that process for each of these. And then the very last section is this synthesis. And so you'll choose card 7 here by combining the visual cues of 4, 5, and 6. So just like we did when we went from, let me get this to the right size, when we went with visual cue A and visual cue for the magician, and we use those together to choose a card, we're going to do that a second time, that process, but this time the process will be the visual cue from card 4, visual cue from card 5, and that one from card 6. And you'll again go through the deck. If this is an intentional pull, you'll find one card that has all 3 of those visual cues on it, and that's your synthesis card. And that's gonna represent your personal symbol of unique expression of this calcination stage for you. And you'll I'm sorry, I'm kind of half trying to talk and half trying to read, and I'm not doing either one successfully. So once you found your synthesis card and chosen the one that has those 3 visual cues on it, then you'll meditate on that, and from that card you'll choose a symbol. Now this time it does not have to be a visual cue. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of times people come up with really very unique, and a lot of times when they find their synthesis card, first of all, it resonates very, very deeply for them. And sometimes they want the whole card. They're like, this card is perfect. Everything about it is perfect. That's my symbol. It's like, no, we need to crystallize it a little bit more. We need to find the underlying structure of this perfect symbol. And so you're going to draw a little glyph, or a very simple line drawing, a very simple expression of what is the essence of this card that embodies this whole process that we've gone through, from the significator through going through all these different steps of this interpretation. And then you'll draw that symbol right here. I'm going to leave that to you to work on your own, but I did want to share how the process works.
Can you say something about the little box that's above the spread? Did you say something about that and I missed it?
I did not. Let me pull that up again so I can address that. This is what my teacher taught me to do for a spread, to always record day of the week, date, time, moon phase, the deck I was using, and my personal mood. And the question here, you don't have to ask a question. You're actually, and sometimes I remember to change that and sometimes I don't. We're actually working with this significator card and this calcination process for the topic of, how do I transform this? So it would be like area of transformation is what you would write here, and then put in why you chose the significator. I want to transform this within myself. But I recommend doing this kind of a record keeping thing for all spreads.
Yeah, I just want to check. So yeah, it's asking for 2 decks. Should they be separate styles? Okay.
I mean, I would say if your personal deck is the Rider-Waite-Smith, then you could use 2 Rider-Waite-Smith decks, but I think it would be boring to do that.
Yeah.
So I think I would choose that just out of an interest factor. But if you only have one deck, and there's certainly cases in which I would say, oh, don't get hung up on it. Just do what you have to do to complete the spread. I personally like to do, I just said for those 1 cards to go with something a little more traditional, because I want the symbolism of those, of the magician, strength, and devil. I'd prefer to work with symbolism that's a little bit more universal. And that's why I said to use a traditional deck for those 3 cards. And if you have a really good argument not to do it that way, by all means, go ahead and follow whatever is moving you.
I typically work with the both decks.
Oh,
but
yeah. Oh, of course.
have-
Yeah, that absolutely counts as
Okay.
as both a traditional deck and is good for doing
But
this
having a
personal work.
second one might be helpful for additional symbolism is kind of what I'm hearing you say as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we're done. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, thanks everybody for participating. Do you have any final questions or comments?
I have a comment. I loved this one. I loved all the discussion and it just felt, you know, much more flowy and organic, and it was really great. Thanks to all of you and to Joy and John, for sure, for all the work you did.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It's been a good class to bring all these different elements together. It's exciting to me. Thank you so much. Enjoyed all of your presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.